Crows, they're the other big talking point from the weekend, the fact that it seems a long time ago and there's been a lot of footy since. But I would imagine
there'd be a little bit of pressure coming on to Matty Nicks, you reckon? The locals?
I don't suspect there's a lot of pressure on Matty Nicks because he's recommitted, but I think there's pressure on the footy club. It's been brought to bear.
There would be if he hadn't recommitted.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I don't even know how much of it is coaching, how much of it's what's going on around the joint, structurally, recruiting, talent identification, all those sorts of things. So Stephen Rowe, who's quite a loud voice over there in the Adelaide media, his son was on the list, James Rowe, there for a while. He's always been outspoken, and you're wondering whether there's pressure coming to bear. Let's have a listen to Rowe.
Not enough people say it. It's a boys' club, and I know what will happen. They'll throw an assistant under the bridge. They'll say the development's not right, and the same key people that I've been in onto for a number of years will still remain in those chairs. That list management group has to 100% go in the Bunsen burner.
So you only can work with what you've got. So let's have a look at the first round picks and see whether or not he's got some sort of a point to be made here. So these are going back to 2016. It's all subjective. You can put ticks next to them or crosses next to them or question mark, whatever you like. But the reality is, of all of those first round picks, there's none that have just jumped off the page. Now, Riley Thilthorpe, from all reports, was flying at the start of this summer and was ready to make a mark, but hasn't been able to play. But the rest of them are,
well, we know where Rochelle is. Mike Lanny had a very good year, a good start to his career.
Servants here.
The rest of them, your first rounders, they've got to be your stars. Your stars of the team, and there's not enough in there in that crop.
Maybe Fogarty he was a slow burn, but maybe he could be, a tick of sorts. But one thing that I've noticed, like Adelaide's game was built on pressure. Their last two rounds have been two of their lowest three pressure results, and it really does affect them. I think their game relies on manic pressure on the ball, really good structure to be able to achieve that, and I think that's their ace in the pack. That's the genesis of the rest of their game, and they're just not getting that right. So that takes real fire and energy from every individual, and you need to be able to sustain it over 4 quarters to put an opposition into that.
And I think there's an element of they haven't been able to handle the expectation. Big expectation in that town coming into the season goes after. Most people thought they would have played finals, or probably stiff not to play finals last year. So the natural progression, you think, we'll just play finals. So they wouldn't have been booking their holidays till October. So, it's a lot of pressure on those lads in that town, and they're going to have to learn to cope with that.
When we parted company on Wednesday night, it was the risk for Adelaide is that the town would be burning if they lost against Richmond, and that's pretty well what has happened. It's Adelaide's closing in around the Crows, and it's not the superficial conversation around the coach. It's much broader, I think, around a lot of decision making and a lot of people who have been there over a long period of time, and whether what has been built is actually going to come to fruition.
It doesn't look like it at the moment. I mean, there's a lot of people under the gun at the moment. We know a few of them. Mark Rasciuto is one. He's the head of football. But, the list management, you look at everyone has assessed the Crows list at some stage this year. And you go, maybe, cross, maybe a tick, maybe, question mark. There's too many question marks on that list. So they've got to work out whether it's a development, whether it's the recruiting, and they've got to find some urgent answers.
Yeah. And they've come to the position that the list is not good enough.
Yep.
Well, this is the list that you have built and cultivated over a period of time.
Speaking of big stories, Ralphie, Adelaide, the pressure is rising. You've spoken to some people at the club about the realities facing the Crows at the moment.
That's right. So they know exactly where they're at, which is that they weren't quite mentally strong enough to deal with the expectation of being a final side, and they certainly weren't good enough to withstand those key injuries which they've been hit with. We'll talk about those in a moment. So, look, they're not going to sack any staff. Mark Rasciuto is out as a club director at the end of next year, not this year, next year.
He's come under the pump.
He has. He'll have his 4-term limit and he will step down. But as Adelaide's telling me, it's a pretty hard role to fill. You've got to be impervious to criticism. You've certainly got to be someone with an amazing skill set there and connections across the town. So it's not that he's irreplaceable, but he will move on there. But look, they're not interested in sacking anyone.
Ralphie, let's cut to the chase. Where did the club think they've gone wrong? They're clearly gone wrong. Where do they think they've gone wrong?
So here's the injury toll. So they get to round one, they lose Riley Thilthorpe, who they think is going to have a massive breakout year. He'd had 2 great trial games. They lose Rory Sloane without playing a game. Tex Walker's back is stuffed from early on. He's never had a great impact. They lose Elliot Himmelberg as a backup. And then when they finally come good after that 0-4 start to the year, they lose the Sam Draper game. They lose the Isaac Rankin running too far game. They have a draw that could have gone either way with Brisbane.
They've missed Rankin.
Yeah, and then they lose Rankin, and then they lose Matt Crouch, and Jordan Dawson's got a big toe issue. So they're just not quite good enough. So top 4 contenders can withstand that issue, but they always knew they needed to top up. They always knew that their list, if everything went right, would be okay. As it turns out, everything's gone wrong.
The debate rages about the Adelaide Crows list. The coach of the Adelaide Football Club, Matthew Nix, had his say on that.
I'm confident we have the list. Like everyone in the competition at the moment, it's been a tough year, and we're working on getting our game back where it should be. But I'm confident we have the list.
So if he had his time again there, Matthew Nix, I think he would say something like, I like our list, it is growing, it is building, but it is not finished yet. They've got more pieces to add, there's no doubt about that. And I'm talking about top-end talent, they need some more spice in that midfield. Clearly we like Saligo, but remember they went for Clayton Oliver. When the Clayton Oliver carrot was dangled late last year, they were first in the queue. Errol Goulden was another one. So they're clearly in the market for a big fish midfielder, and I think that really helps out the Dawsons and the Rankins and the like in there.
If you can get Errol Goulden, that's fine. But if you can't get him, you go back to the draft. I mean, they will have pick 4 on their current ladder order. You look at some of the players in the most recent picks. George Wardlaw, Nick Dacos the year before, father-son, I know. Lockie Ash in 2019. You look at the players who have won grand finals for their teams in the last decade. They are the top 5 picks. Now, Adelaide think they're about 5 years into what might be a 7 or 8 or 9 year rebuild. They're not at the top-up stage. They are at get an elite inside midfielder. You get Scotty Welsh's son as a father-son, who's probably a pick 20 or 30.
But Ralphie, can I pull you up for a sec? That's going to take more time.
They're
Like,
going to
don't you
need
get the feeling like they nearly made finals last year? I just think, I don't know, if you get a draft pick, there's no guarantee.
Do you think they've got the list? Do you think they're top-up worthy?
They're a mile off it.
Yeah, no, I just don't think they're in a position. I think if they've got some quality they can get with their first pick, then I think they entertain that. Because clearly they've got some salary cap space. They were close. I think, another early draft pick, another 4 or 5 years wait, I don't know.
So you thought they were close.
Yeah, so you look at the Essendon model. You get a top 10 pick, that's Nate Caddy, and then you go and get some free agents, whether that, is someone like an Elliot Yeo, you give up big bucks, when you've got $18 million in the salary cap, you can spend all that kind of stuff, but you don't give up your very premium picks in an elite draft full of star midfielders, which is exactly, Macca, what they need.
Absolutely, and pick a few mongrels too. I reckon they've got some nice players.
Where is the mongrels? 2 years ago, they were mongrels. They out-tackled their way to wins. Now they're soft.
I mean that in the nicest possible way with the mongrels, but pick some guys who've got a bit of...
I think Adelaide can have one down year, one blip year. I don't think they could afford to have that next year.
How many have they had?
I think that's when the pressure will rise. Well, it's sort of been a linear improvement until this year. Righto, Macca, there's a special piece coming in the Adelaide Advertiser tomorrow.
Absolutely.
A deep dive on the Crows situation.
Yeah, Matt Turner's done a deep dive on the Crows and it's fantastic. He's spoken to a number of former coaches of the club and they've lived this experience. Graham Corns, Malcolm Blight, Brendan Sanderson. Basically, a lot of things that footy... I think Sando's of the view that this is not a bad list, this is okay. A couple of the others believe that the players just don't have the confidence to win tight games, which seems remarkable. Sando believes that Matthew Nix is going okay, but they just need to pinch some wins. Psychological weakness, a few of the other boys have mentioned, is a bit of a problem. And that's where I say a little bit of mongrel about him wouldn't hurt.
Isaiah Rankin likely back on Saturday against Sydney.
Back.
Dan Curtin not homesick, doesn't want to go home, just get the ball into his hands. He's being reprogrammed as more of a high half back rather than a key position defender. Great news for Adelaide fans.